I've been trying to do about 40 miles a week, kind of in 7-mile chunks. This is trail walking / running, mix of each. It's felt really good.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Sen, and today I have the honor of having on Carl Baum, who is a professor and is an inspiration to me and many other people. Today, we'll be able to hear his incredible story. And to start off, Carl, how old are you and where are you from?
Thank you, Michelle, for having me. And I'm 58 and originally from California,
Oh, what part of California?
Pasadena,
Lovely, lovely. And where do you live now?
in South Carolina,
And you're a professor in what department?
in electrical and computer engineering.
Very cool. So, what brought you to discovering this whole plant-based lifestyle?
So yeah, it's kind of the story. So I grew up eating kind of the standard American diet, meat in every meal, not much attention to health. That's how my family raised me. And so we all ate that way. 11 years ago, so that would be 2011 or 2012, my dad was coming out to visit me here on the East Coast, along with my stepmom. And it was kind of a trip that had an intermediate stop before they came to me, where he was doing some business. And he was still in business at that time at age 80. But he basically had a heart attack on that stop. He didn't realize that he had a heart attack, but he just suddenly felt very weak and tired, basically canceled the rest of the meeting, and they flew out to see me. And he basically just lied on the couch the whole time, was feeling really, really tired and wearied. They finished their visit, flew back home to California, and finally saw a doctor. And it turned out he had had a heart attack. And when you've had a heart attack like a week or weeks before, if you've survived it, usually, it's not an emergency situation anymore. And so, he visited his cardiologist, who never had one before, but, had one. And initially the cardiologist was recommending that he get an angiogram, which is where they basically take a picture of the blood vessel flow, flow of the blood vessels in your heart. It is an invasive procedure, so it has some risk, particularly as you get older. What they'll normally do during that procedure, if they see blockages, they'll insert stents, if the blockages can be resolved with stents. And if not, then they'll schedule a second open heart surgery for later. And so my dad asked the doctor, do you think I should get this procedure? And the doctor said, well, I really can't answer that for you. And then my dad asked him, well, if I was your father, what would you say? And the cardiologist waited and thought about it and then said, well, I probably wouldn't recommend you get the procedure. And so basically they went home. The way my stepmom puts it is they went home to die, because nothing could be done. And he had he was very tired. And he had lots of chest pain, lots of angina. And so that's where things kind of stood for a while. And then they happened to watch Forks Over Knives during some sort of public broadcasting PBS special. They have those for fundraising every once in a while. And so he caught that and was really fascinated by that. And that led him to read this book by Dr. Esselstyn called Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. And that basically takes a whole food plant-based diet and specializes it to people who have had heart issues. And it's based on science that Dr. Esselstyn himself did 2 big studies with patients. He worked at the Cleveland Clinic, which is a super prestigious location for heart things. And basically he took the patients that the other cardiologists didn't know what to do with. They'd all been through multiple stents and open heart surgery and things like that. And he put them on this diet. And he also met with them every single week and in his home, actually, with his wife. And his wife would cook for them and teach them how to cook, because it really is a lifestyle change. And so the book goes into the results of the studies, which are truly amazing. It's really some of the most amazing results I've ever seen in medicine. And it essentially completely stopped further progression of heart disease. And in many cases, did this thing that was previously thought to be impossible, which is to reverse heart disease. And so my dad read all this and decided with my stepmom that they were going to go on the diet. And so he did, and he felt somewhat better almost immediately. Still had the angina, and then he started taking walks in his neighborhood. And at first, he could just barely walk to the corner and walk back, and that's all he could do. And then he started adding a little more. And he lives kind of in a hilly region, so he started walking uphill. And the way he describes it is one day it suddenly just felt a lot better. And he started increasing his walks to where he was now walking 2 to 3 miles a day. And and so he was super hyped on the diet and kept on doing it. And so they would later come out and visit me again. And now, to me, I think they're kind of doing something kind of crazy. I don't believe it. I've not read the book. And they want me to cook for them, or my wife to cook for them on this diet. So they actually sent me some very simple recipes and said, this is what we want to eat. And so I was the one who ended up doing it. And I'm thinking, this is such a pain. This obviously doesn't work. I don't know why they're doing this. But that was my first exposure to whole food plant-based eating. So fast forward to basically 5 years from that event, so 2017. And one morning I woke up and suddenly felt some kind of sharp sensation in my chest. It was actually more in the back of my neck region than my chest. And so I didn't even think it was a heart attack. But I went to work and noticed that I could hardly walk without pain. Even a parking lot that I used to think was flat, just walking on it, I could tell you which way was uphill, because the slightest little uphill and it would hurt more. And so I really struggled with this for about a day or two. And then I went to my doctor, and he took an EKG and said things don't look right. And so they sent me to a cardiologist. And by the time I saw a cardiologist, it was probably about 1 to 2 weeks later. So again, I was past that emergency stage when they can do other interventions. But they recommended for me the same thing they had recommended for my father, to get the angiogram. And if I need stents, then they would put them in during that procedure. And so at this point, what my dad had done suddenly became a lot more real to me. And so they sent me a copy of the book, and I read it, I think, in one day, and was ready to try this. But I also was willing to go through the procedure because this is what the cardiologists recommended. But reading through the book and watching some other videos, what I realized was that, if it's something like a total blockage, I really definitely want to go with that procedure. But if it's borderline, I really want to try the diet. And so I went to the hospital, they prepped me, and the doctor who was going to do the procedure was a different doctor than the doctor who I'd already met, and actually was not planning to talk with me at all prior to the procedure, which I thought was a little strange, and said, no, I really, really want to talk to the doctor before the procedure. And so he came in and spoke with me, and I held up the book. I said, I've read this, and I'm going to do this starting the very first day I get out of here. And explained to him, if it's borderline, I don't want the procedure. I mean, definitely do the angiogram to learn what's going on, but don't put in stents unless it's, something like a total blockage. And so he sort of agreed. He hemmed and hawed a little bit, so I didn't quite know what was going to happen. And for the procedure, they don't put you under entirely, but they do sedate you, so you're not really aware enough to know what's going on. But when I came out the other side of the procedure, it turned out I did have 3 75% blockages, basically on the back of the heart, at a place where an artery splits into 3. All 3 of those were blocked at that same level, and it was real close to the junction, which makes it actually very difficult to place stents. I'll say more about that in a minute. But I also had a 50% blockage on what they call the widowmaker artery, which 50% is not considered enough to do a procedure, but that's probably even more concerning than the 75s, because it's called the widowmaker for a reason. And so anyway, I later learned that because that place was so difficult for putting stents, what they'll often do is use a special kind of stent that would completely block one of the three arteries and use it as an anchor to open the other two. And then you're going to lose whatever piece of heart muscle was attached to that artery. And so there would be permanent, loss of function as a result of that procedure. So I'm super glad I didn't get that procedure. The doctor decided, no, these are 75s, I won't do it. I later learned also that the doctors write comments on your record, and some of those comments you can read and some that you can't read. But my cardiologist read me everything that I can't read. My new cardiologist actually switched to one who was plant-based and supported what I was doing. And what the doctor wrote was, he'll be back. In other words, he didn't think I could keep up with the diet. He didn't think that I would succeed, or that the diet would reverse things, something like that. And so since then, every year on the anniversary of that procedure, I sent him a note within the medical email system saying, I'm doing great, I'm still here, I'm not back. And he always replies very politely, that's great. And so, but just to educate that you can do this. So anyway, yeah, so that was my decision. And I didn't know how I was going to do it exactly, but I knew I was going to go on that diet. It was right around Thanksgiving. And so after I got out of the hospital, basically, I cooked Thanksgiving meal for my family because we already had all the food, and I normally do that. And of course, I didn't eat any of it, but I made it and then started to try to figure out what it is I'm going to do. And so, yeah, that's how I got on the diet. And that was the beginning of it.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And how old were you when the heart attack occurred?
That would have been 53.
I see. And before that, had you already felt signs and symptoms that maybe your health was declining?
Yes. I just didn't recognize it correctly. So, and this is not uncommon. When you have blockages in the back of the heart, the pain is often a referred pain. It doesn't show up where the heart is. And so for me, it was in my neck. And so I would notice things like if I'm on campus, and I carry a laptop around, and I have a backpack for that. When I put the backpack on and walk up a hill, I would notice I feel a lot more of that neck pain. And I just figured it was my neck straining because of the backpack. But in reality, that was angina. I just never recognized it. And that went on probably for a number of years before I had the heart attack. Another symptom I had that I didn't recognize was there'd be times when I would go from sitting to standing, and I would just feel very dizzy and faint. And that is another sign that things are not right. It can have other meanings as well, but that goes with it. And then I just had not great health in a lot of other ways. I had a lot of migraines, and they were steadily increasing, where kind of at the end there, I was getting a pretty significant migraine twice a week. I was also overweight. I was about 40 pounds overweight. And my blood cholesterol numbers were pretty terrible. Right before the procedure, my total cholesterol was 260 something. I don't remember the LDL, but I'm one of those people that unfortunately has very low HDL. So most of that number is LDL. And so it was a bad number. So yeah, those are kind of my problems.
And what were you eating before you switched to eating plant-based?
Kind of like I said, the standard American diet. So dinner would be something my wife would cook, and it would be a meat main dish, maybe pasta or rice on the side, and a little bit of veggie. Breakfasts were usually just a bagel and cream cheese and an egg. Lunches, I was eating out a lot. So a lot of fast food, a lot of Chinese fast food, really unhealthy stuff.
Like dripping in oil. That's very classic of Chinese takeout.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. And did you do any exercise back then before your heart attack?
Very, very little. I mean, every once in a while I'd take a walk or something like that. But and I was walking on campus. I probably walked around a mile each day on campus just because I had to.
And I asked that because I know you exercise quite a bit more now.
Yes.
What's your current routine?
So because this is summer, I have a little more flexibility in my time. And so I've just been experimenting to see what I can do. But I've been trying to do about 40 miles a week, kind of in 7-mile chunks. And this is trail walking / running, mix of each. It's felt really good. I've really enjoyed this. Kind of stemmed out of, I went on a ski trip a few months back and just kind of realized for the first time that my body can do a whole lot more than I thought it could. And so that's kind of been the motivation to push it. But pretty much since I've been on the diet, I've been doing 3-mile walks and then eventually started adding some running to those.
How does that feel in your joints to have that amount of mileage?
Yeah, my joints feel fine. I've just been blessed, I guess. I don't have any arthritis. And yeah, they're handling it fine. I've had a little bit of sore muscles that I notice if I take the day off, they start to get back to normal. So doing it 7 days a week, I think is a little too much for me, but I feel like 5 or 6 I can handle really well. So
I feel like you're turning into ritual. Like this is gonna keep escalating. You're gonna start flying.
I don't think so, but it's been a lot of fun. And I've really enjoyed just being able to hike and be out in the outdoors. And definitely, I prefer that over kind of an urban kind of running.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I chose the Zoom background actually, because outdoors trails, that's what I like too. And what other benefits have you experienced as a result of going plant-based besides being able to magically run 40 miles per week?
So one of the most surprising things to me were the migraines. They disappeared immediately, literally immediately. And so I went from 2 a week to 0. And in the last 5.5 years, I've only had 2 or 3 migraines, and they're always triggered to something. One time was when I had a particular vaccine. If I'm severely sleep deprived and then do something else, then that might trigger a little bit of one. But it's such a dramatic change in my life because I would be really incapacitated 1 or 2 days a week, and that's completely gone. So that's been great. Obviously, my blood numbers are dramatically better. If I didn't take any statin, I do take a smallest possible dose of rosuvastatin just to drive my numbers a little lower. But without it, I'd probably be around a 160 to 170 total cholesterol with LDL in the low 70s, which is pretty good. But the rosuvastatin drops it down to about 130 total cholesterol and makes my LDL about low 60s. And from some things I've seen in some studies, if you can keep your LDL below 70, to use the phrase that Esselstyn uses, you're heart attack proof. And so that's what I've chosen to do with that. Again, smallest available dose of that statin. And all my other blood work looks great. My blood pressure has dropped over the kind of slowly. It did that. Probably, I don't remember the lower number, but the upper number used to be maybe 130, and now it's more consistently 115. And normally when you get older, it goes up, not down. So that's pretty impressive. My resting heart rate has dropped a lot. And that may be due to the running. I don't know, but it used to be in the 70s and now it's about 60. So it's also a big change.
It sounds like you're not just reversing heart disease, you're reversing your age.
It feels like it. I mean, I really feel like in terms of energy level, like I was in my 20s now. So
incredible. And these migraines, I'm curious, some people, are you eating salt, oil, sugar free?
Close, not fully. But in terms of oil, yes, I don't eat any oil. I don't add any oil. The only oil I'm getting in my diet is what's naturally in whole foods. Sugar, I'll sweeten with something. Sometimes it might be maple syrup or dates or something like that. Salt, I'm not super careful about since I don't have high blood pressure. But I don't almost never add salt to my food. But if a recipe calls for some, I might use half of what the recipe says or something like that.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I just asked because I meet a lot of patients who have migraines, and for them it seems like salt is actually the thing that triggers it. When they remove the salt, suddenly the migraines go away. But it's hard to tell when you make such a drastic diet change. Like, what was the variable?
Yeah.
Do you have any?
It could have been dairy. It could have been dairy. It wouldn't surprise me. because I did have lactose intolerance, and yet I could still eat things like cheeses. And I've read, cheeses are one of the common migraine triggers, for example. So
hopefully we won't have to experiment with that again.
no, I'm not going to. I have no interest in finding out what it was. So.
Yeah. Wow. So what do you snack between meals at all?
Occasionally, particularly now that I'm running a lot more, I have more appetite. So a snack might be a piece of dried fruit, or maybe sometimes a half of a whole wheat bagel. I'm really hungry. I'm truly hungry, a whole wheat bagel. But yeah, that's typically it, or a little bit of fresh fruit. Although I eat a lot of fruit during my meals anyway. So
by a lot, do you mean like multiple bananas or?
So let me describe my breakfast and you'll see what I mean. So I start with kind of the bottom layer is a cup of oatmeal, and this is the rolled oats, which are actually, people don't know this, but they're pre-cooked. So you don't have to cook them over a stove. It's not necessary. And in fact, the recipe that's in Esselstyn's book, what I'm doing is very close to his recipe. But I start with a whole cup of oats, which is a lot of calories, but I like my breakfast to be a big meal. And I add a little bit of flaxseed for omega-3s. And then I add some dried fruit, and it's different every day, just to make something chewy in there for the texture. And then I add a sliced banana, and then I'll add some other fruit, which might be, like today it was 2 apricots, or it might be a chopped up pear. And then I'll add about a cup and a half of mixed berries, either frozen or fresh, depending on the season. I'll add a cup of plant milk, and then I'll add something for crunch on top, like grape nuts. There's another cereal I'll use as well that has kind of a vanilla flavor. And so you put this whole thing together, it's this kind of masterpiece thing of it has crunch and chew and a bunch of different flavors, but there's probably 5 servings of fruit in there when you include the dried fruit and the fresh fruit. And so I'm probably getting the entire day's worth of what the government says I should have in fruit just for breakfast. And then for lunch, I'm typically having whatever I'm having an apple and an orange with it. So that's a fair amount of fruit.
I just had lunch, but I'm getting hungry. What you eat sounds so delicious. And what about dinner? What do you typically have for dinner?
So let me back up a little bit on that. Just say I am married and I have adult kids who are not on the diet. And so my wife cooks for herself and for them for dinners, and I cook for myself. And I'll cook typically twice a week, make something that has leftovers. It's often kind of a stew or something like that reheats well. I also do a bunch of stir fries where you saute in water, not in oil. I do a bunch of curries, a bunch of chili. And in many cases, it's over whole grain brown rice, a short grain brown rice, because I love rice. So
great. And is it difficult at all to be trying to maintain this way of eating when your family members eat differently?
not for me. I mean, I think I knew this when I started the diet that this would be the way it would be, and so I knew my house would contain things like this. And so I just kind of mentally made that decision. There was something very powerful about the decision to not get stents. It's hard to communicate this, but I basically knew that I was now responsible for my life. I mean, we're always responsible for our lives, but we don't ever think about this, right? We don't think about how our eating choices determine our future health. But for me, it became abundantly clear, and I would have nobody to blame but myself if I got another heart attack, because I didn't get the stents. I didn't take any other, do other procedures that doctors might have recommended in the future. I was trusting the diet, which meant if I didn't do the diet, that's on me. And so that's really helped me to stay motivated and really not be that tempted by the things in our house. When there's a birthday and they're all having birthday cake, I'm not tempted to have a slice of birthday cake. I'll get some dried fruit or I'll get something else, and it's fine. I do make some desserts, by the way. There's some very healthy desserts I make with sweet potatoes and other things, and they taste like brownies, and it's great. So, so yeah, I'm not really tempted by the things in our house. And for me, it's also just kind of been, don't even taste it, don't sample it, because that's kind of the path to the dark side. Don't begin, and then you'll be okay. And so, yeah, that's worked out really well for me. Also, there's some science here too. You know, if you go plant-based, but you continue to occasionally have oily meals, your palate doesn't adjust to the new way of eating. And one thing I noticed when I first started eating, everything tasted kind of bland. I didn't like it. And then somewhere around 2 weeks, I remember eating an apple, and it was like the best apple I'd ever had in my life. And what was happening was my taste buds were changing, and that's true. And you really have to stay on a diet like this to experience all that. And then there's also some medical things, right? So if you every day have a little bit of animal products, then that causes your gut biome to be a certain way. That tends to lead to unhealthy outcomes. Whereas if you completely abstain, then your gut biome changes, and those pathways that I think go through the liver stop. And so there's reasons to do it totally and not partially.
Wonderful. And do people ever comment negatively about your lifestyle and the way you eat? I would imagine that not many people around you, besides family, eat this way either.
There have been a few people that have teased me a little bit here and there, but most people remember the old me that weighed 40 pounds more. And, they were kind of amazed at, probably in 9 months, I'd lost all that weight. And so they were amazed because I looked really different than I did 40 pounds ago. But I think now they stay amazed because lots of people can lose a lot of weight, but who can keep it off? And I've maybe gained 5 pounds of it back in the 5 years since. And so that I think people respect that. And I've had a few friends actually go on the diet. And so that's been neat to see.
You've been the lighthouse for them. That's awesome. How do you deal with eating out?
When possible, I don't. That's the simplest answer. I think it's probably easier in some places than it is in this part of the country. But where we are here, there are very few options. I do know, I can't think of the name of the restaurant. It's a kind of a fast food Mexican restaurant.
Chipotle?
Chipotle. So there are ways to get in and out of Chipotle pretty close to being compliant with my diet. Yeah, you can have more salt, but I can do pretty well on the oil, on the total fat content. And the only way I figured that out was by going to their website with all of the nutrition information, clicking on every single little ingredient and figuring out what exactly I can have to keep that low. And so if I were traveling and in a pinch, I would look for a Chipotle because I've already learned how to do that. There's also a pizza place where I've learned how to make it. They have a vegan pizza, but you got to go further because that's still too high in fat for things. But I've found a way to do that as well. But I don't seek these things out. When I'm traveling and I have to deal with it, I deal with it. I also allow myself to, have a little more fat, oil when necessary. So, the example I serve with a professional organization, and they fly me out to some location and provide meals, and I know they're going to struggle, and so I just tell them I'm vegan, and I figure if they can do that much, then I can work with that. And usually breakfasts are on your own, so I can handle my own breakfasts. And again, I'll eat a big breakfast and get a lot of calories there and bring some healthy snacks. And so that's kind of how I survive it. And then airports are a place you can actually do pretty well because you can find smoothie places, you can find pretty compliant sushi at a lot of places, and so there I'm able to get through things.
Cool. And what tips do you have for other people to stay compliant?
So, I mean, the first one, if you're just starting, is you are almost certainly not going to eat enough when you start. This is a mistake I made and tons of people I've talked to, and it's all about the density of your food, right? So when you oil is 9 calories per gram, carbs and protein are 4. And so if you have a nice small little plate of something like you used to, it could have, potentially only half the calories of what you think. And so you're just going to have to eat a lot more food. And the way you'll know is if you're constantly asking, what do you eat for snacks? And this is exactly what happened to me. I was on the diet for about a week or two, and I called my dad and said, what do you eat for snacks? And his answer, nothing. You're not eating enough. And so I started making bigger plates, and sure enough, I didn't feel that need to snack so much. So that's my first tip, is make sure you eat enough. And then I think the second tip would be just to be willing to experiment and try, you can start with some, kind of, there's lots of you can find forks over knives recipes online, lots of other, if you get the Esselstyn book, there's the back half of the book is recipes. You can find lots of recipes to start, but feel freedom to experiment with them and change them and do things to them, and basically find a small number of meals that you really love, and then just keep on working on them, make them better and better and better. And you'll eventually just love your food. I love my food more now than I ever did prior to going on the diet.
Cool. And let's see, in your notes you'd written to me about tips for compliance. You mentioned packaged compliant foods. Can you talk about what you specifically get for that?
Yeah, that's thanks for reminding me of that. So one example of that is sauces. If you go to your favorite store or whatever, you just start having to read labels, and you may find lots and lots of things have lots of fat in them, and so those are a no-no. But if you keep looking, you'll find some things. Like you can find a spaghetti sauce that has essentially no fat. You can find barbecue sauce that has no fat. You can find things like that. There are lots of things like that. For salad dressings, it's harder. So one choice is to use a very high quality balsamic vinegar. And if you don't know this, there are stores that sell nothing but olive oil and expensive balsamic vinegar. Find one of those stores, or you can get it online. And obviously stay away from the olive oil, but choose a well-aged, high-quality balsamic vinegar. You've never had anything like it if you've not had it before. It's a salad dressing in itself. And you can also add to it. You can add mustard and other things and experiment and turn it into something that's compliant. Another thing for packaged foods is soups. There are a good number of soups that have essentially no oil in them. And one example of this would be split pea soup. You can often find split pea soups that are very compliant. They do have a lot of salt, so I wouldn't have them every day. But there's also a lot of these health companies are making packaged soups that are really compliant and even low in salt as well. And so I always have a bunch of these on hand. I have to go to Whole Foods to find them, but I'll buy a whole bunch of them and just have them kind of as emergency food, so that if I don't have time to cook or whatever, I'll just take one of them. And then you can make it healthier. So what I do is, first of all, it's not enough calories for me, one of those. And so I'll mix in a bunch of brown rice, pre-cooked brown rice. And I'll also add a big handful of kale. And now you're getting your greens in there, and it actually tastes better, in my opinion, with the kale, and you could use other greens. But I try to get greens into as many meals as I can. You can stick them in any soup, any chili, any stew. You can always just add greens. And I would do it the day of that you're eating it, and just when you microwave it up, it's going to microwave in there with the soup, and it tastes great.
Yum. And you had also written PB2. Does that refer to something?
Yes. So I used to love peanut butter, and I just assumed that life was over, no more peanut butter. But there is this thing called PB2. There's actually a couple of different varieties of it. Can't remember their exact names, but one of them, the basic PB2 basically removes, I don't know, 90% of the fat. And so it makes it pretty compliant. And it's pretty easy to see how they do that. If you just ever buy a natural peanut butter, you'll see all the fat rises to the top of the jar. And so they're basically sucking that out and giving you the rest. And the great thing is it's still, and now PB2 is a powder, so you have to add water to it to mix it, but it truly tastes like peanut butter. You don't miss the fat. It tastes great. And there's some versions that also are, I think, have no salt added or something like that. So, so for me, I can still have peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I, get a good whole grain bread and have mix up some PB2, and jam is compliant. And so there you go. If you got a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I recommend that you toast the bread before you put this thing together, because when you remove the oil from peanut butter and basically replace it with water, you are creating something that can make your sandwich get soggy. And so if you toast the bread, then it won't get soggy and it'll be fine. And then I've also used peanut butter in this way for desserts. And so and I've also used it in some like Thai food and things to get a peanut sauce. So it's pretty versatile. And as you cook longer and longer, you'll start to get more confident in cooking, and you can take a recipe that was not compliant and figure out how to do substitutions to make it compliant. So I do that a lot now.
I had no idea about PB2. Thank you for sharing. How did you find out about this? It sounds like magic.
I don't know where I first learned it, but yeah, it's great.
That's fabulous. Wow. And thank you. These are all incredible tips that will make it a lot easier for people to stay compliant and deal with, eating when you're on the road or traveling. Very
Yes.
helpful. And what is your current motivation to stay this dedicated to the lifestyle? Is it mainly to avoid the heart disease, or are there other factors?
Yeah, there's a number of parts to the answer to that. So yeah, I originally went on the diet to live, basically, to live for my family, to be around. And I think I've mentioned this to you before, but when I go to my cardiologist once a year, I get a printout of an EKG. And I think one of the dangers of doing a diet for health is when you actually achieve what it was that you aimed for, you lose your motivation. And so I think this is why lots of dieters go back and gain the weight back. And so for me, I tend to think of myself now as a normal person, not a sick person, not a person who has heart disease. But I still do have heart disease. The heart attack did do damage to my heart, and the EKG shows it. I can look at the graph of the thing, and I can see, I think I have it here. It's abnormal R wave progression. That's the term. And so it's like a PQRST, and they label where the R is, and they can see that I've done damage to the back of my heart. So seeing that plot and seeing it freshly each year really helps me stay motivated, and not to think, hey, I'm out of the woods, I can do whatever I want now. I can add a little oil back. Yeah, I'm sure start a little step by step. There's also a whole chapter in Esselstyn's book titled Moderation Kills. And he's actually looked at follow-up of patients after multiple years who start kind of easing up and going back to not to an old standard American diet, but even just getting more lax on the oil. And progression and heart disease can start to continue to progress again. And so although I'm in a sense heart attack proof because I'm eating this way, I've done a lot of damage to my arteries throughout my body, not even just to my heart, but throughout my body. And so if I go back to eating a higher fat diet, that fat impairs the endothelial cells that line all of my arteries. And so I can very quickly get back into trouble. And so that motivates me pretty strongly. I'm also now motivated on an ethical side as well. And so I would have never thought I would become an ethical vegan. But it's very interesting. When you don't eat animals and animal products, you can think a little more clearly. You don't have anything biasing you kind of subliminally to keep doing what you're doing. It's not a threat to evaluate the world and evaluate the cruelty we do on animals. And I would not force my veganism on anyone, but now that I'm able to see without this bias, I would personally rather not be a contributing factor to animal suffering in any way. And so that's a second motivation for me.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say that, how they went vegan for health reasons, and then slowly other issues like environmentalism or animal rights come to play.
Yeah.
And how do you deal with it when someone says, I made this just for you, and they hand you a dish that's maybe vegan, but they added a lot of oil in it or something?
I may taste it, but I'll then explain to them my diet and how it's important that I stay on it. And I have a family, so I can often say, I'll take it home and I'm sure my family will love it. And so that's a trick I've used a couple of times. But it is a limitation. Again, I don't travel as much as I would otherwise. And I know there are people out there who make it work, who travel a ton and do the diet. I'm not that person, so I can't really advise how to do that. But I mean, my advice would be more strong. I would say, if you've had a heart attack and you're thinking about doing this you're talking about a really major change in your life already. And if you have a job that is not amenable to that lifestyle, I would seriously think about changing the job, because the job is going to help you if you don't live. And so that would be the way I would think about it. Again, there are parts of the country where you can do much easier with going in and out of restaurants and things that, again, where I am, it's not a thing. So
I see. Does it ever bother you? For example, you lecture to halls full of students, and you're probably seeing them with their packaged chips and all the kind of sad diet food. Does it ever bother you? Do you ever wish you could say something about it, or you know that no, I should just stay out of it and not comment?
So, I think students like it when professors share a little bit about their lives. So I don't do it every semester, but sometimes I do tell them, by the way, I'm a vegan, and if you want to learn more about that, we can talk about that. Also, I teach a course on signals, and to illustrate some of the concepts, I talk about an EKG. And that gives me an opportunity to say that, hey, by the way, I know all about this because I had a heart attack 5 years ago, but I've controlled it through diet. And if you want to learn more about that, you can come see me after class. And sometimes students do come by and want to hear about it. So I do drop little hints here and there.
That's so cool. And do you know if some students have started eating more plants because of what you've encouraged them?
I don't think so. I don't know of any, but when there is a vegan in the class, they're like super happy to hear someone else say that they're vegan too. So
That's wonderful. And your kids, they don't eat this way. Have you tried to, kind of like your dad did, do you kind of try to serve them the food and be like, hey, maybe this is a good idea? Or do you also just, pull back and say they'll come to it if they're ready?
yeah, I've kind of pulled back. We've had a lot of conversations. Yeah, they're just not at a place right now where they want to do it. And so I respect that. Again, they're adult children. I do think when they are completely out of the house, they're sort of halfway out right now. Like they're here this summer, and one of them will be back in the dorms in the fall. And my two older kids are completely out of the house. But at some point, we're going to be empty nesters. And I think at that point, I don't think my wife will be opposed to me cooking dinner for the two of us. And so it'll just be one set of dinner. She likes the food I make. It's just again, she's cooking for the kids. And so I think that's more the issue. And she might still do whatever she does for lunch and breakfast. But and again, for her, being on the oil-free part is not as critical. It's not critical. She doesn't have, as far as we know, heart disease. So so she may eat breakfast and lunch very differently than me. But I think if she doesn't have to cook, she'll be all for that. So I think she'll be joining me for dinners.
Beautiful. And what are your goals for the future, just in general?
I mean, that's a good question. In terms of the diet and in terms of exercise, I just want to kind of see what I can do. I realize that being in my upper 50s, whatever I do, I'm not going to be able to do forever. And it's not like a 30-year-old starting out
But you feel 20 now, so.
I do. That is true. And you recently interviewed a doctor who was 99 and was amazing. So I guess my thought is I want to see what my body can do in the next few years, because I have no idea how many years that's before I have to slow down a little bit. But I'm always going to exercise. When I can't run anymore, I'll walk. When I can't walk, I'll ride a bike. When I can't ride a bike, I'll swim. So I'm going to be exercising forever, because it just makes me feel so much better. And as for the diet, I'll do the diet until the end. So, but yeah, I would love to live a super long time and prove people wrong, and I've joked with you that when I turn 99, you can do another interview with me.
A follow-up, yes, is appropriate.
Yes.
Wow, that's wonderful. And in terms of exercise, besides running, do you do anything for strength training?
Just a very little bit. So it's more like I'm trying to strengthen muscles so running emphasizes certain muscles, and then supporting muscles around it don't get used, and that can lead to injury. And so I'm doing some things to try to prevent that. I'm not really doing any upper body workouts now, but for example, I've had a little bit of issue with an Achilles tendon. And so I'm doing exercises to strengthen all the muscles around it to make sure that that doesn't get worse.
Mm-hmm. And this story that you have of changing your lifestyle after having a heart attack, have you been able to share it with other people who perhaps have heart disease or have also had heart attacks in the past?
Yeah, a few people. So one was a professor's father. We did a Zoom call just like this, and we spoke, and I think it may have been one of the first times I contacted you, actually, because he's Chinese and doesn't eat an American diet at all. And my question was, is there a whole food plant-based recipe book in Chinese that you knew of? And I don't think we found anything. But so he contacted me once, and then a second time, because his doctor then was progressing to recommending open heart surgery, and he was debating about whether to do that or the diet. And so we talked. I don't know what he's decided. That was just a week ago that we had that conversation. And then another person I know, another professor, his father died of heart disease in his early 50s. And so he's heard me talk about the diet, and he decided, I'm going to do it. And so he's been on the diet for about 4 or 5 months. He's lost all of his excess weight. He says he feels great. And yeah, he goes to the same church I do. And so we're kind of seen as the two oddballs who do this diet. But yeah, he's very happy with it.
I see. And hopefully if other people come up and they want to know about your story, you can send them the video too. And
yes,
say, watch this first as education, and then let's talk.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. What would you say to somebody who hears your story and says, well, that's great, but it's just too hard. Like I don't have the time to cook my meals for myself. I'm too busy. It's too stressful. What would you say to them?
I would argue that going out to eat takes far more time than what I do. My breakfast takes 10 minutes to make. Even with all those extra goodies that I put on there, it's 10 minutes. My lunches generally take 10 minutes to make. One of the most common lunches I make, it's a little strange, but it's designed so I can take it to work. I start with one of these glass containers, and I press into it a whole pita bread, whole wheat pita bread. It's oil-free. And then my next layer is brown rice. The next layer is refried beans, which come out of a can. And then I'll add some mushrooms and some onions and some kale, a whole bunch of spices. And again, start to finish. And then I squish a lid on this thing. It's like trying to stuff an overstuffed suitcase with all the kale on top. Squish it down, bring it to work, and just microwave it when I'm ready to eat. Again, 10 minutes to make that thing. And I have a super delicious, super filling meal. And that's how, that's just one example, but my lunches, that's what they're like. They're 10-minute lunches. I know lots of people get a frozen meal, and take it out of the freezer, and you have to defrost it for 10 minutes or whatever it is. What I'm doing is no more time than that. Now, dinners do take time. They take about an hour. Most of my dinners take an hour, but I only make them twice a week. And so that's really so little time. And then if I don't have time for a dinner, I just make a second lunch, or, there's some very simple things I've done with, like making spaghetti. Get spaghetti sauce, get spaghetti, and then steam some vegetables or microwave some vegetables and mix it in. That's a very healthy meal. So you can do it. It's not the time effort that you think. And it doesn't take a lot of skill. I was not much of a cook at all before other than cooking Thanksgiving dinner, I guess. I was not much of a cook prior to this.
I've seen photos of your food. They look really professional. I think you are a chef now for sure.
It's fun. I mean, it's turned out I've really enjoy cooking, and I do make some fancier things. But it's not. Those are my dinners, and again, that's not necessary. You can keep it super simple.
Mm-hmm,
and to experiment with spices, because it's endless what you can do, and when you will find some particular combination of flavors that you really love, then just keep doing that, and you've got one of your, say, 5 meals that you keep coming back to. And again, that's what most people do. They don't eat 50 different meals. They eat 5 or something like that.
Mm-hmm, right. And your doctors, when they see how good your cholesterol is and they see these EKGs, have they been perhaps influenced at all to think more about changing diet in order to improve one's health?
Yeah, I've gone through 2 different primary care doctors. The first one was aware of the diet and supported it, so he wasn't shocked by anything, but he sort of ate halfway toward it. But I recently switched to another doctor who is very much on my diet, or at least a whole food plant-based diet. And you go to her office, and there's Esselstyn's book is on the shelf, and Forks Over Knives is on the shelf. All these books are there. And she really specializes in helping patients with this diet. So it's been really nice. And the last time I went, she had a med student there who was shadowing, part of med school. And so she just said, well, why don't you go tell your whole story? Because this med student doesn't know anything about the diet. And so I had a chance to explain the diet as part of my visit. And the visit went way over, usually it's 15 minutes a patient, but I think it was probably an hour that I spent with her. And so that was really fun. But I also love her because she's really into exercise. And the story I've told is that right before that visit, I actually had a fall on one of my trail runs and gave myself a huge shiner, a huge black eye, just managed to fall right on my face. And I came in with it kind of bandaged up because it doesn't look good. So the first thing she does is she takes it off, and she says, so what happened here? And I started to tell a story. I was trail running, and she just cuts me off and says, great, and doesn't want to hear any more of the story. And I thought, this is great. So yeah, I knew I was in the right place. And then for the cardiologist, I'm now on my 3rd cardiologist, and he is, again, super supportive of the plant-based diet. And the last time I met with him, we also went over, and he was just telling me how frustrated he was about how he can't get anyone else to do the diet. And, and so we talked about it. I talked about, the thing that Esselstyn did was he it wasn't just meeting every 6 months. It was this weekly thing. And I think people need that. I also told him I was available. If he ever wanted me to talk to a patient, I realize it violates probably FERPA or all that stuff like crazy, or HIPAA, I guess is the right one. But I'm available. And so, yeah, anyway, I feel very fortunate that my doctors understand the diet, they support the diet, they wish they had more patients on the diet. So it's been really nice.
And everyone's going to want to know, how did you find a primary care doctor that fabulous?
She was one of the teachers at the medical school. She actually taught the nutrition section at the medical school. And I have a child who's in that medical school. And so that's the conversation that started it. And then I got more information on her. So
I see. Wonderful. And was there anything I didn't ask you about that you wanted to share?
just if people aren't fully familiar with the diet, maybe I could just explain what exactly the diet is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually have Esselstyn's book here open. So
Awesome.
make sure that I say what he says. So I'm going to quote from him. This is on page 5 of his book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. Here are the rules of my program in their simplest form. You may not eat anything with a mother or a face. No meat, no poultry or fish. The next one, you cannot eat dairy products. The next one, you must not consume oil of any kind, not a drop. The next one, generally you cannot eat nuts or avocados. And then the second half, you can eat a wonderful variety of delicious nutrient-dense foods. The first one, all vegetables except avocado, leafy green vegetables, root vegetables, veggies that are red, green, purple, orange, and yellow, and everything in between. The next one is all legumes, beans, peas, and lentils of all varieties. The next one is all whole grains and products, such as bread and pasta, that are made from them, as long as they do not contain added fats. And then the final one is all fruits.
Amen.
So that's what I've been doing for the last 5.5 years.
Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much, Carl. This has just been such a pleasure. You
Thank
make
you.
this, yeah, thank you. You just make this lifestyle so approachable for people. I think a lot of us can get really overwhelmed trying to make this all work, yet you show how it's actually pretty simple and you can still stay married and stay good friends with
Yes.
your kids. It's so possible. So thank
And
you
once
so
it's a
much.
habit, then you don't even think about it anymore. I mean, that's where I've been. I was probably at that point just a month or 2 into the diet, where it was just the new normal, and you just keep doing it day after day, and it's no harder than what I used to do before I went on the diet.
And hopefully people, after hearing your story, will find that it's simpler than they thought and they can definitely do it. So thank you for leading the way, and happy trail running.
Thanks.